what is the deal between buy and rent? As a developer, it doesn't make any difference to you whether a landlord buys your house or an end user buys your house. आपको तो कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता, because sale is a sale. But if let's say that you in your social circles, family or friends would ask you, Ramesh, please help me, buy or rent, what would be your answer?
And let me tell you, Anupam, this is not the first time someone has asked me this question.
Yeah.
So apparently when you look at it, a rental seems like a better option, given the fact that the yields on a capital asset, is between 1.5% to 2%. But at the end of the day, if I'm an end user and I intend to live in a city like Mumbai or Bangalore or Delhi NCR, I think over a period of time, it does make sense to invest in its own property.
Black and white. Okay. For the listeners, of course, Ramesh knows what I'm talking about, but black versus white. There was a time when if you had to buy a house in Bombay, you had to shell out like tons of money in cash. I'm hoping that this has now changed.
Access to capital today is far more. There are far many more avenues of raising capital. First and foremost, the banks are more open to organized businesses and they are more than willing to lend money. They're sitting with ton loads of money, not knowing where to deploy them. And they have fewer players or fewer credible players to actually park them in.
Ramesh, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
My pleasure to be here with you, Anupam.
Fantastic.
It's wonderful to be here with you all.
Thank you. So, just what the intro that I had, tell us about K Raheja, background, projects, and what I spoke about, how Mindspace is part of this, but it's not part of what you represent.
Well, absolutely. I think as K Raheja Corp, we've been in the business for over 5 decades. We built most of Car, Bandra, Santa Cruz. Residential was what was our bread and butter for many, many decades. But over the years, we came to realize that the commercial business, has a significant role to play, and it grew much larger in size over the years. And over a period of time, we became a significant player in that space. And today we are known by the name or the brand name Mindspace. So that's Mindspace, which we have there. And it's one of the few listed leads that we have in India today. But what we also felt over the period of time was to create a separate niche and a mark for what we truly represented for many decades ago, which was creating homes for people. And hence from that respect, what we tried to do was to create a brand called K Raheja Corp Homes to primarily focus on the residential business of what we do. So today we as a company are present in 4 critical markets or significant markets for us, being Bombay, Pune, Hyderabad and Bangalore. And very clearly what we have tried to do is to create sub-brands which have a unique niche for itself in the market that we operate in. So we are present in terms of a product offering varying from 70 lakh rupees to as much as around 35-40 crores. And under that, what we've created are unique brands like Vivaria, Artesia, Vistas, Viva, and hence we've been more trying to promote these brands and build around that, as I would call it, as a large umbrella brand being K Raheja Corp Homes, with the sub-brands being these all to try and position ourselves for the various segments that we operate in.
So, you're probably the best person to talk about homes because, like you just said, you cater across the segment. Could you just walk our listeners through how behavior or behavioral patterns of home buyers have evolved during the pandemic? Because what we saw was a little bit bizarre. Till 2020, before the lockdown hit us, the real estate industry across, and I'm talking about homes out here, was facing problems like inventory issues, stagnation in prices for a long time, and then a lot of action happened. Let's just walk through all of that to build up to where we are today.
So I think a lot has happened and a lot of things have been learned by all of us in our individual lives through COVID. And I think in a very positive way, it's had a bearing on the real estate sector as well, especially in the home buying segment. At a certain point in time pre-COVID, most of the developers used to be conscious about the ticket size and make homes according to the same and make them compact. But what the lockdown taught us was the requirement for that one extra room, which is our home office. And many of us over the 24 month period had to actually force ourselves to work from home given that we couldn't step out. So I think that has really changed the way people perceive their living spaces, whether it is within their apartment in terms of wanting more space or within their complex in terms of having open spaces to walk around, given that there was a fear psychosis during the early stages of lockdown of people having to walk out. We've seen that make a tangible difference in the way people are making their buying decisions today. And surprisingly, at a certain point in time, I used to observe 2-bedroom apartments sold more than the other category. But now I observe 3 bedrooms being in greater demand than the 2 bedrooms, and those seem to be moving faster. So that's been a very definite change I see in the buying preferences of people, and in terms of living in communities that are with more open spaces. And I think that has been the clear differentiator or a distinct change in the buying preferences of people during COVID and post-COVID.
Very interesting. I want to talk about luxury real estate now, right? Because you just mentioned 20-25 crore. Just the number is a little bit hard to digest. But I want to talk in detail here about two things. One, where is the demand coming from? And two, on average, have you seen your per square foot realizations actually go up in this last year? That kind of shows in the broader theme that we are seeing about urban consumption, premium products. Like you had the DLF project sell in 24 hours, like $1 billion, just boom. Okay. Can we just talk about this? A, where is this demand coming from? Okay. And B, are you also seeing this trend?
So let me tell you, Anupam, it is, when we think of India as a poor country, or it's a developing country, I wouldn't call it a poor country, the demand for luxury and the demand for people in that top segment, which probably may be around 2% of the economy, is humongous. It's not honestly catered to also in full. And I guess these are people who are highly informed, travel the world, seen, experienced different kinds of service levels, different kinds of products. But their aspiration at the end of the day is to come back home. Home is India, wherever that they live. And they want the best for themselves and their family in this country. And I think that segment is not being necessarily well catered to, even though there are many developers. You can have many of them. But there are very few that these customers who have the discerning customers, if I may say, who have an insight on what really they want. And there are few who are able to walk up to that particular level of trust that they have. And hence, if you land up seeing in the luxury space, there are very few successful developers. So this is one aspect. So demand is, I would say, inelastic. I would put it in that way. But in terms of real quality of developments that are there are very few that can actually cut up to that mark. And hence, once we do a good job, this segment works extensively on word of mouth. And people also in this segment like to live around friends and family. So a lot of that word of mouth helps in also generating and creating communities where they all want to be living in. And I think that has primarily driven the way the luxury segment has grown over the last few years. This also comes in the back of the sector not doing that well for many years before the lockdown. But what changed during the lockdown were a few incentives that the government came up with in terms of stamp duty reduction. That was a substantial saving for many people who were investing in this space, because imagine you're buying a 30 crore home and a 3% saving in stamp duty is 90 lakh rupees. So there was a serious amount of money that one could save. Plus, during the lockdown, builders were also more amenable to negotiating on prices.
Correct.
And added to that was also the all-time low interest rate regime that existed at that point in time. We probably have never seen a combination of all that coming together, and a lot of finished inventory that was there, which in a way also enabled these customers to waive off the GST that they would have had to otherwise pay for a finished inventory. So a combination of all these factors and the desire for larger living spaces had also resulted in this sudden boom in the sector. Many of these people, when I take an example of Mumbai, have been living in South Bombay in standalone buildings, families growing, desire to live in larger communities, and naturally many of those people were upgrade customers. And we've been beneficiaries of that, just as some of the other developers across the country have been in seeing this upgrade, because most of these people are not certainly first home buyers. They bought many and over, and they are looking for a lifestyle where they would like to be living in. So today what I see in the luxury space is not investors. I see a lot of end user demand. And that's healthy, because then you are seeing no speculation, and that is genuine demand, and you'll end up seeing transactions getting closed when the apartments are ready. So that's a significant difference.
Humor me. Let's give our listeners an idea of what a 20-25 crore flat is like, because I don't think I'll ever be able to buy it. Of course, I wish I can, and I wish our listeners also do. What are these flats like? How big are they? And do they come with gold-plated accessories everywhere or what?
So, in many instances, if I may say, I think this is about providing better spaces, better planned spaces, size of rooms. The dimensions of rooms are not necessarily like the typical ones that you see. In certain degrees, when you also try and build these kind of high rises, people also provide a lot of home automation. And more than anything, it is about the common amenities that are there within the complex and the safety of the building. At the end of the day, most of the customers here in this segment don't want the builder finishes to be provided. So even if I were to put a gold-plated faucet, the customer wants to put a faucet of his desire, of his liking. And so in many instances, what we've noticed is they rip off whatever the developer provides.
Is that right?
Yes. So many of the apartments in that space get sold as bare apartments because of the unique preferences that the customer may have for the marble or for the floor layout or for the fixtures that are being actually put in the apartment. So it's a very different buying process that they look through. But more importantly, as I say, it's about community living. I mean, if they see their friends, their family, their circle of friends moving in, they all like to be together. It's like a flock moving together, and they would rather be in that kind of a space rather than anything else. Yeah. But one of the key things that drives there is the common amenities and the safety features and the home automation features that are there provided for within the complex.
Yeah. Okay. Moving back to more realistic things. Let's do a quick review of the real estate markets where you are present. Okay, because Anurag, which also folks have been on Paisa Vaisa, you can listen to their episode. As for Anurag, this has been one of the best years for real estate. Okay. What's your view on that? At one point of time, inventory used to be a big issue with the real estate, especially residential. Okay, and since we're only talking about residential in this episode, can we just walk through your review of where we are today, how it's looking, and then we'll come to the outlook part later.
So Anupam, I think COVID taught us, and I think in COVID we saw the demand soar, and I think that momentum is continued post-COVID too. So I think we seem to be in good space today. Inventory levels are at an all-time low, or when I mean inventory levels as in overhang, are at an all-time low, less than 3 years inventory on an average as you see across the big cities. Buying has been at one of the highest, I would say at a decadal high. New launches again have been at a decadal high. So these have been very good times because new launches are being well received. We've seen some bumper sales performed by some of the very credible developers across the country. We've also been fortunate in our experience of making new launches hugely successful, given that there is a demand. And I think that is very clearly there to say. This also augurs well given the fact that India today is a $3 trillion economy. We are looking and we seriously seem to be on track to become a $5 trillion economy in another 2-3 years from now. All that augurs well. And real estate accounts for almost 12 to 13% of that GDP. So when the economy does well, real estate also tends to do well. And Indians typically have the mentality to save. I mean, we are a savings economy, very similar to China as we hear. So there is a propensity to invest in a home. I mean, that's the first thing that probably you and I did when we started working of buying our first homes. And I think that continues today.
Okay, so there are two things here which, I don't know, might be temporary drivers of demand. We are now in May, and I if you can just help me here with whether this is continuing or not. Driver number one was the change in capital gains tax, which happens from 1st April of this financial year, by virtue of which I think the number is 5 crores. Okay, that any capital gains that you make in, say, selling shares, at one point of time, you could just take the entire thing, invest it in real estate, and you don't have to pay any capital gains on whatever you've sold. I believe the government has now capped that at about 5 crores. Okay, so there was one theory doing the rounds that maybe the last week of March saw a spurt in high-end real estate for this purpose, and that might cool down. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, some state governments like Maharashtra especially have given some SOPs. I don't know what's the status right now of those benefits, whether it is stamp duty or whatever was there. Do you think, that was a temporary bump and going forward you might see a slightly softer pace of growth, or do you think that there's something more structural happening here?
So Anupam, on the capital gains, it's actually 10 crores what they've actually clarified now. So effectively, any gains beyond 10 crores would be taxed, but anything within 10 can be reinvested without any taxes there on the capital gains, on the long-term capital gain. So I think that did spur a certain degree of closures in FY23 or by March 23. A lot of those fence sitters felt that it was probably wise for them to go ahead and invest and take the benefit of that. But as much as my apprehension was that things may slow down, we didn't see that slow down in the month of April. And that's been interesting. So the momentum seems to have carried on. May not be at a macro level, but certainly at certain project levels, I have seen that momentum continue. And I think that, in my opinion, is here to stay. Supply constraints would remain, given the fact that there are so many more launches that have come. But at the end of the day, it's all about the builder's reputation, the location of the project, what kind of infrastructure is coming around in those areas. Those are critical drivers, and I think projects which are well placed that way would still continue to do well, which is also evident from the way you see many of the listed companies' performances. They all have grown significantly in the last 2 to 3 years. So it is effectively, when I see, is also a case of demand consolidation. So you will have a situation where some of the developers may not do that well, but some of the established names will certainly go ahead of the pack. And that's what is going to be the key differentiator, as I see, in the way the sector is consolidating. Slowly but surely it is happening.
I want to, now that you mentioned consolidation, I want to talk a little bit more about this, because it's that, for anyone who's been in this industry for long enough, or been in, if you've observed other industries in India also, this whole thing of smaller to bigger, operators, builders, or whatever it is, players getting nudged out and the bigger brands coming in. And you're seeing that happen so well in Bombay. For the longest time, maybe a couple of decades ago, homes would not sell just on the builder's name. They would just sell because you need a home and you buy it and you get it wherever you want. Now, apparently, at least as far as Bombay is concerned, because that's all that I see, and you can help me whether this is happening in other markets also. Homes are going as per the builder's brand, and a brand in real estate is really something new, that you would not have seen 10, 20, 30 years ago. So this consolidation that's happening, let's just talk about that for a bit.
So a few things have actually happened, and I think it started off with the way GST came into play. And along the way, we also saw the setting up of RERA, the Real Estate Regulatory Authority, and the way they wanted to bring in a certain level of discipline into the business. All these things have made it more and more difficult for a fly-by-night operator to really operate. There's too much level of, already it was a highly regulated sector, but beyond that, the level of compliances that is actually required here now has gone to another level altogether. So what it has done, it has certainly brought in a greater degree of transparency in the way business is being done, and which was the need of the hour, or if I may say the need of, for that matter, for any sector to flourish, you needed a greater level of transparency and predictability of doing business. The regulations have actually brought that. Even the development control rules have been greatly simplified, when I say across the country, in terms of how one can look at how development can take place. I think all these things have augured very, very well, and really, in a way, has brought about a shift in the way business is being done. With the result, the larger players have found it easier to scale up, and hence becoming better at doing what they are in a replicable manner, as against a small operator who found it easier to probably manage the approval environment, but couldn't manage the entire value chain of construction, selling, post-sales delivery, so on and so forth, which reputed players have definitely gotten up manship of.
Black and white, okay? For the listeners, of course, Ramesh knows what I'm talking about, but black versus white, there was a time when if you had to buy a house in Bombay, you had to shell out like tons of money in cash. I'm hoping that this has now changed. And, any thoughts on that?
I think a lot has changed, in my opinion, in the sense how business was done. Firstly, access to capital today is far more. There are far many more avenues of raising capital. First and foremost, the banks are more open to organized businesses, and they are more than willing to lend money. They're sitting with ton loads of money, not knowing where to deploy them, and they have fewer players or fewer credible players to actually park them in. That said, in addition to that, equity is also much easily available. Today, private equity players today are investing ton loads of money in India, and they see India as their future. I mean, China was the big story earlier. Today, India is certainly emerging from the shadows of becoming a significant player, and many people are now looking at India more favorably. And I'm not just saying in terms of real estate, but I'm also in terms of manufacturing. So, given all that, capital is no longer a constraint. And then there is capital easily available. There is no need for making any such arrangements. Further to that, the customers also whom we are dealing with are all looking at raising home loans to buy their homes. It's not possible that all of them have their own access to capital to buy it on full equity basis. So when you see the overall ecosystem, whether it is supplying or access to capital for development or a customer who's actually looking for capital to buy his home, that value chain is well supported, which was not probably the case a few decades ago. And I think that has changed the way business is being done. And I think it's good for the long run, as I see it.
Yeah. Okay, Ramesh, now let's get into the stuff that is, that directly affects our listeners. Let's say that one of our listeners out there wants to buy a home. Okay. What is your checklist of tips or, something that he should look at for in a developer that will help him to shortlist and choose projects? What should he be looking out for in the developer, in the home, maybe top 5 or top 10 things?
So first and foremost, I would say is the developer's track record of delivery, of product quality, of the way the developer has treated their customers in the past. And this information, Anupam, today is readily and easily accessible thanks to RERA. All that information is there. And the beauty of RERA today, especially Maharashtra RERA, they very clearly called out the black sheep. And developers are very clearly being named and shamed who have not necessarily honored their commitments. And that list is coming out. So I would urge all our listeners to actually look through RERA website or MahaRERA website.
Sure.
In case they're looking for a project in a market where they have identified and they figured out the ticket size is to their liking, they must visit this website and look out for more information about the developer's past track record, developers' ability to deliver projects, because the entire portfolio is like a drop down. You can pick and you can see what the developer has done. And further to that, I think with the social media is, if we can do a little more checks, we can certainly understand how the developers have treated their customers. And I think that, in my opinion, will be the clear point where the customer should do their homework before they decide on buying anything. Because at the end of the day, service delivery is the key differentiator in this sector today. And product necessarily is not so. Because if I provide a marble, someone else also provides a marble. If I provide a world-class home automation technology, the same thing is replicable by anybody else. But what cannot be matched is the timeliness of delivery, the product in itself as what has gone into the same, and in terms of compliances, whether this project has met with all the necessary compliances. Because we don't want a customer who's putting his hard-earned money to land up into any of the issues which may be related to the title or may be related to the approvals that have been obtained in not necessarily the right way. So I would say, I think due diligence on the developer is the most important thing that one should do. And fortunately today, all that information is available at a click of a button.
Okay, I want to understand between developer reputation and price. Okay, and price is again a function of location. Okay, for a lot of people, that becomes a trade-off. Like they'll see a house that they really like from a really good developer. Okay, but that's at least 20% more than my budget. Okay, versus some other, house which is within my budget, but थोड़ा आगे पीछे करना पड़ रहा है वहाँ पे. Either the location is not right or the size of the house is, somewhere there's a compromise out there. So when you're faced with such a situation, okay, and this is only for end use, by the way, okay, because we are not talking about investing at all. This is somewhere that I'm going to stay for hopefully the rest of my life. How should I, do this trade-off? What's a good way to look at it and approach it?
So I think, this is a situation that we all have faced. I would also think of early in my career when I looked at this was always a trade-off that I had to consider. But the easier way to deal with such cases would be to buy or invest in a ready-to-move-in apartment from a not-so-reputed developer rather than go into an under-construction project. Because we keep hearing about horror stories where developers are unable to complete the project is stuck for years on end. So rather than get into those kind of predicaments, it's better that a customer looks for a ready to move in apartment from the not so ideal developer that he may want to invest in and probably pick it up. And in many instances, what you also land up seeing is this inventory is lying there, and the developer who's built it is also desperate to complete and get out of the project. So you may find a customer getting a sweet deal out of these developers too. So I would rather de-risk myself if I were in that position today of investing. But I certainly wouldn't recommend investing in an under construction project, which is 3 years from delivery, because who knows what happens tomorrow. And I think that's the way I would rather mitigate my risk if I were in that position.
Yeah. So that's a golden rule, folks, that between a ready to move in versus an under construction, always go for the ready to move in because you're getting your product there. And I guess you're also talking about, Ramesh, out here about all the approvals.
Absolutely.
It's a bit of a gray area, but I'm assuming that the home finance companies kind of take care of us out here. They wouldn't give a loan to something that's kind of shady, right?
You're quite right, Anupam. I think I missed that point. The fact yet remains, today when you are buying a ready-to-move-in apartment and you are taking a home loan, the home finance companies do a complete thorough recce or a check on the title. So in a way that also endorses whether you're buying into a product which has the necessary approvals, has the necessary titles associated to that. So in a way, it does what you need to actually do your diligence on. Yes.
And of course, now, I want to get this out of the way because, man, this is a really hot topic and I have no idea why. What is the deal between buy and rent? As a developer, it doesn't make, any difference to you. Whether a landlord buys your house or an end user buys your house, आपको तो कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता, because sale is a sale. But, if let's say that you, in your social circles, family or friends would ask you, Ramesh, please help me, buy or rent, what would be your answer?
And let me tell you, Anupam, this is not the first time someone has asked me this question.
Yeah.
So apparently when you look at it, a rental seems like a better option, given the fact that the yields on a capital asset, is between 1.5% to 2%. But at the end of the day, if I'm an end user and I intend to live in a city like Mumbai or Bangalore or Delhi NCR, I think over a period of time, it does make sense to invest in its own property. I say this because probably real estate is one of the best hedges for inflation. Today, when I keep my money in the bank, the value of the money erodes over a period of time, given the inflationary trends. Stock market is not where I would recommend to put ton-loads of money because, honestly, we really don't know how it behaves. Real estate has traditionally been a very safe asset. And given that the way the cities are expanding, how infrastructure is changing the dynamics of the city, you have a fairly good chance for the asset to appreciate. And I wouldn't say this as a guarantee because you can invest in real estate and see that the asset is stagnant. It can also happen. But if you invest wisely, you see the corridors where the growth is happening. You see the locations where economic drivers are likely to come or happening. You see the metros, the trans-harbor links, or a new economic center emerging in close proximity. Those are clear signs for one to go after. And if you are smart, you would land up seeing that these are probably the best bets to invest in. And many people have made ton loads of money in that process. So I would certainly say invest if you have. It also brings in a certain degree of discipline. And at the end of the day, if I earn 100 rupees every month and I know that I have to put 50 rupees towards my EMI, it also brings in a discipline, a systematic investment of your money, even though it may be to pay your home loan in monthly installments. But it certainly brings in a certain degree of discipline. And in a way, you are creating a long-term value for yourself over a 10, 15, 20-year period. So I would strongly recommend buy a home rather than rent.
Okay. Ramesh, one massive trend that we're seeing in Bombay, and especially the western suburbs, is redevelopment. I don't know whether K Raheja Corp Homes is doing redev projects, but I get this question a lot from a lot of people that my house is either going for redevelopment or we as a society are considering redevelopment. So for someone who owns a house in a building that is going for redevelopment, what would be your advice to this person when they're looking at a builder and choosing someone? Because this is it's a sensitive thing, right? Because redevs normally involve, for me as a person who's giving up his house, I'm really going into a black hole. I'm trusting a builder that he will come and he will deliver the entire project on time, which may or may not happen. Of course, there's error. I agree with that. But there are a lot of things in play. Of course, and there is a nice big payoff for me also because there is a corpus that I get, there is rental that I get, and there's extra area that I get. So given these moving parts, what's your advice out here?
Well, interestingly, Anupam, we've just about started looking at that space. I mean, the last year or so, I would say, we've been looking at redevelopment. It's not something that we did for a long time, but many of the societies that we developed in the past.
And you're talking about Bombay or
I'm talking about Bombay.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
We've seen many of the societies that we developed in the past have been 40, 50 years old, and they now see their families expand, and the opportunity of increased FSI also creating a temptation for societies to go for redevelopment. So many such cases have actually now started coming our way, where they want to continue their association with us.
Yeah.
So their fathers brought in,
Wow.
and now their
How
children
about
want to
that?
redevelop.
So you're saying the older building was also a Raheja property,
Was a
K
Raheja
Raheja,
project.
and now that, wow.
Yes, we've seen those coming our way. So it's a space which is interesting. And Mumbai has been seeing this redevelopment trend for the last, I would say, couple of decades. It's also the fact, given that Mumbai is a very old city. I mean, we've seen many parts of Mumbai over 150 years old, and the other parts closer to 80, 90 years old. So there is a trend for going vertical, and that also comes at the expense of demolishing what is already there and then building a modern high-rise structure.
And the government has also given a lot of
And there are many
benefits
incentives too for such redevelopment to make it a win-win for the developers and, more importantly, for the societies that are going in for redevelopment. Coming to the second part of your question, which was what should one society look for, or a resident in a society look for, is certainly the same thing as I mentioned earlier, the reputation of the builder, as to what has been their track record of delivery, and more than anything is their financial strength. Because at the end of the day, come what may, if the markets go turtle or the markets go south, if I may use the right word, would the developer be in a position to complete the project on time or not? And for that, the developer needs to have deep pockets or access to capital to ensure that that project is completed, come what may. And I think that is what a society should be looking at. There are developers who would be willing to offer much sweeter deals, given the fact that in redevelopment, the upfront capital involved or invested by the developer is insignificant as in comparison to the value of the asset. So all the more the reason that the societies don't get tempted by these over-attractive proposals that a developer may offer, but go for the tried and tested. Safety is better here in this case.
Yeah, and that's such a... Folks, really, you just want to have a balance between what's called the commercials of the agreement versus the reputation of the builder. Typically, both might be slightly off. A reputed builder might not give you the best possible commercials, as it's called, like I said, corpus, rent, and extra area. But he's going to give you a finished product that has a certain value at the end of the day. Because I'm assuming that developers are also approaching a redev like it's it's part of their reputation. So they're not doing this as just another deal on which they can make profit, right? I mean,
well, absolutely. I think today what I notice is many of the developers who have traditionally not necessarily been in the redevelopment space have started looking at that more favorably. That's also because in a city like Mumbai, land opportunities for a brownfield, greenfield development are very limited. So one has to look at redevelopment. And a few things have also changed in the last 1 year when I think of it in the way the rules of the game have changed. For example, a lot of this project were affected by the CRZ norms. Now with the relaxation on those norms, suddenly there is a new crop of land, of societies that have come up for development because the project viabilities have become more attractive than what they were when the CRZ rules were different. So a lot of those things have changed, and I think that does make a big difference.
Okay, wrapping up this episode, Ramesh, what's your outlook in general on the residential home sector? And I'm talking about first, let's talk about it generally, and then about specific micro markets, which look good to you.
I've been in this business for 20 years, and this 20 years have been phenomenal. But I think the next 20 years is going to be even better than the first 20 years that I've seen. And that I say this because we are changing very rapidly. And I spoke about briefly earlier in our conversation about us growing into a $5 trillion economy.
Yeah.
I mean, with that, you are going to see so much more happen in this space, given that everyone wants a home. And I say this not just for residential. I say this in every aspect of real estate, whether it is commercial, the need for hotels, the need for malls, the need for hospitals. You name it, this country is going to see it. In addition to that, we're going to see significant more infrastructure development. We already are witnessing it when we see the kind of bridges, the airports, the stations, the railway stations, the port connectivities. I mean, this country is seeing some amazing level of activity today, and I'm extremely bullish in the way the sector will emerge in times to come. I think the next 20 years are going to be even better than the first 20 years that I've spent in this industry.
Okay. And you said that K Raheja is in Bangalore, Pune, and Bombay. Any trends that you're witnessing? Bangalore, for example, is in its own zone. Every day, on social media there'll be some really insane stuff about either the rentals. The latest thing I heard was some person whose mark sheet was part of a profile that is being sent for rent, and I was like, Bombay is much better off that way. You don't get a house because you didn't get good enough marks in Bangalore. I don't know about that. Anyway,
Well, that's very interesting.
yeah. Jokes apart, any trends in the micro markets? Anything that makes you, that you like to talk about?
So I would say, with the economic development in the level that I'm expecting it to happen, the top 7-8 cities in the country will be the flag bearers of real estate growth. And I mean the top 7-8 being Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi NCR, Pune, Hyderabad, Calcutta,
Sure.
Chennai. These are clearly the flag bearers that I see. I also see tier 2 cities emerging as stronger centers, when I would call it an Ahmedabad, a Jaipur, cities like Lucknow or Kanpur, Bhubaneswar. There is a certain level of activity where the states are also promoting a certain level of investment. And that's a very interesting trend. Every state government wants to promote investment in their state. They're trying to woo overseas investors to invest, set up more employment for people in their state. So I think these are all very good trends that I see. And with that, you will see investment. And with that, one would land up seeing the desire and requirement for homes. So I do see in times to come the demand only going up. There will be pockets. I wouldn't say that there won't be oversupply, but these will be micro market specific. But at a macro level, the demand is bound to be very robust, in my opinion, in times to come.
Okay, interesting. And last question, my final standard question to all our guests. Ramesh, recommendations. Anything good, books, or anything that you want to recommend to our listeners?
So Anupam, I lead all and sundry.
Nice.
Right from history to palmistry to fiction to non-fiction. I love reading them all. I do
Lovely.
sometimes, for light reading, read up. Currently, I'm reading a book written by Adam Scott on the Dilbert's principles. It's interestingly,
nice.
it's a satire on corporate life, and it's quite amusing today when I've been in the sector for 20, 25 years, and I see how things are and how a person like Adam Scott writes about it and portrays it with pretty pictures.
Yeah.
It's light reading. I enjoy them all.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about? Maybe, business, history, anything else that you're reading that you find interesting?
Well, I do have a great level of interest in Indian history. I do read up a lot, and sometimes, you see history repeat itself in certain interesting ways. When I look at how India was considered at the time of independence, the kind of problems that we saw at the time of independence, a lot of it seems to be repeating itself even today. But I'm sure and I'm hopeful that things will change, and a lot of it will also depend on the level of awareness that we all build towards. And I think, I'm completely a student of history, if I may say so. I enjoy it. I listen to music.
Right.
That's another thing that I thoroughly enjoy, playing the instruments or listening to classical music.
Yeah. Anything, Western classical, Indian classical, any favorite?
I think Indian classical any day for me, and Western instrumental music. I think that's something that
within that, any composers or?
I listen to a lot.
Oh boy, there you go, folks. Nice list of recommendations. Of course, the Dilbert Principle by Adam Scott, Indian classical, Western classical. You can listen to them all, and we are ending on a note of optimism on our country, and I'm pretty sure that the world is going to look at us very differently as compared to when history was there when we got independence. Folks, with that is a wrap on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Ramesh Ranganathan, CEO, K Raheja Corp Homes. Ramesh, thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.